Hello, everyone. Nice to see you again in today's story. On the Boring Channel, we would like to introduce to you an ancient story that science cannot explain. Now we invite you to listen to this story. Hey guys, tonight we embark on a little thought experiment, a journey into the very mists of time, a place where the lines between myth, history, and, well, something else entirely get wonderfully, deliciously blurry. Imagine, if you will, standing on a vast, silent plain. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and something ancient, something electric. Above you, the stars aren't just twinkling lights, their eyes watching, and down here, amongst the whispering reeds, you feel it, a presence, a memory imprinted on the very fabric of existence. It's a story that's been waiting eons to be told, and spoiler alert, trying to piece it all together from our comfy 21st century sofas. You probably won't survive the sheer number of rabbit holes we're about to dive into. Or maybe you will, but your search history will never be the same. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to see where you're all tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world, so drop that in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself sifting through the sands of what you've always been told is the cradle of civilization. The textbooks paint a picture, don't they? Hunter-gatherers slowly figuring things out, a fortunate discovery of agriculture here, a bit of pottery there, and poof, suddenly you have cities writing complex laws and people complaining about their property taxes, probably. It all sounds so linear, so neat. Yet, as you stand in this imagined past, a different feeling settles in. It's a disquiet, a sense that the official story, while plausible, might just be the glossy brochure and not the full, messy, and frankly mind-boggling travel guide. You look up at those same ancient stars, the ones that have wheeled over deserts and jungles for millennia, indifferent to the tiny dramas unfolding below. Or are they indifferent? Sometimes, in the deep quiet of contemplation, you catch a flicker, a whisper on the cosmic wind, suggesting that perhaps those celestial bodies weren't just passive observers. Perhaps they were signposts, or even destinations, or origins. This is where the murmurs begin, soft at first, like the rustle of dry leaves, easily dismissed as imagination. But they persist. They speak of a time before recorded time, a genesis that might be far grander and stranger than you've ever allowed yourself to consider. Think about it. For vast stretches of prehistory, human development seems to inch forward at a glacial pace. Then, in various pockets around the globe, but particularly in places like Mesopotamia, there's this sudden, almost inexplicable burst of innovation. The Sumerians, for example, pop up around 4500 BCE, and in a relatively short span, they give us the wheel writing, specifically cuneiform, impressed onto clay tablets, intricate irrigation, astronomy, and even the 60-second minute we still use to curse at our alarm clocks. Mainstream history attributes this to a confluence of favorable environmental factors and human ingenuity, which is, of course, a huge part of the story. But the sheer acceleration, it makes you wonder if there wasn't an external nudge, a forgotten catalyst. It's like humanity was diligently trying to solve a cosmic jigsaw puzzle with only half the pieces, and then someone or something casually tossed a few crucial corner pieces onto the table. This is where those primordial murmurs grow a little louder, a little more insistent. You start to notice discrepancies, anomalies in the archaeological record, like finding a fully functioning smartphone at a medieval fair. Okay, maybe not that anachronistic, but things like the Antikythera mechanism, that incredibly complex astronomical calculator found in a Roman-era shipwreck dating back to the 2nd century BCE. Its sophistication was so far ahead of its time that it took modern science decades to fully understand its function. It's a beautiful, tangible piece of how did they do that? Fringe history that makes you tilt your head and go. And it's not just objects. It's knowledge. Consider the Dogon people of Mali. Their traditions, passed down orally for centuries, allegedly describe the Sirius star system in remarkable detail, including the existence of Sirius B, a white dwarf companion star completely invisible to the naked eye and only confirmed by modern astronomers in the 19th century. They even speak of its elliptical orbit and 50-year orbital period. Where did this knowledge come from? The Dogon attribute it to the Namo amphibious beings, teachers who came from the stars. Now that's a story that'll get you a few raised eyebrows at your next dinner party, right alongside your theory that pigeons are government drones. But these aren't isolated whispers. They form a chorus, an undercurrent in the grand narrative of human development. You begin to sense these powerful, unseen forces not as malevolent puppeteers, not as judgmental deities peering down from on high, but perhaps as, well, what? Gardeners tending to a nascent sapling? Architects laying down foundational stones for a project whose final form even they couldn't fully predict. Or maybe just very advanced beings with a peculiar, almost obsessive interest in a developing species on a rather unremarkable blue planet tucked away in a fairly standard spiral galaxy. It's like they had a cosmic research grant and Earth was their prime study site. Historians still argue whether the rapid transition from nomadic life to settled agricultural societies during the Neolithic Revolution was solely an independent human invention across multiple regions, or if there was some form of subtle, or not so subtle, information exchange or external influence at play. It's a debate that touches the very core of our understanding of progress, a subtle tremor in the bedrock of established thought. The idea that we might not have figured it all out on our own can be a little unsettling, can't it? It's like diligently training for a marathon, only to discover your personal best was heavily influenced by an unknown benefactor who secretly swapped your regular sneakers for winged sandals halfway through. Or finding out your prize-winning sourdough starter, the one you nurtured with organic flour and filtered water, actually came from a pre-packaged kit you'd forgotten you bought. The ego takes a little hit, sure, but it's also profoundly exhilarating. It doesn't diminish human achievement. It reframes it within a potentially vaster, more interactive cosmic neighborhood. It opens up possibilities, expands the horizons of what could have been, and perhaps what might still be waiting in the wings. These aren't just tales for late-night chats around a flickering campfire, nor are they merely the stuff of speculative fiction designed to sell books or fill convention halls. They are persistent questions, echoes embedded in our oldest myths, etched into our most ancient ruins, and some might even argue, subtly woven into the very fabric of our being, perhaps even in our DNA. You're no longer just looking at a static historical timeline printed in a dusty textbook. You're peering into a vast, interconnected mystery, a living tapestry where every unearthed artifact, every deciphered script, every anomaly might just be a breadcrumb. And these crumbs aren't leading to a simple answer, but to something or someone that fundamentally reshapes our understanding of who we are, where we came from, and perhaps most importantly, where we might be going. The stage is set, the shadows are long, and the first act of our cosmic drama is only just beginning to be understood, its earliest lines faintly audible above the static of millennia, and so you find yourself drawn inexorably towards those earliest lines, towards a place where those primordial murmurs first found a voice, a tangible form. You're no longer in the realm of abstract feeling. You're heading towards a specific point on the map, a sun-scorched land between two rivers, Mesopotamia, the land of Sumer. Imagine the dry heat on your skin, the taste of dust in the air, the distant bleating of sheep. It's here, amidst the ruins of cities like Ur, Uruk, and Eridu, that something truly remarkable happened. It wasn't just the invention of cities or laws, impressive as those are. It was the invention of writing. Not just any writing, but cuneiform, those distinctive wedge-shaped marks pressed into wet clay with a stylus, a reed cut from the riverbanks. You kneel, metaphorically speaking, beside an archaeologist in the 19th century, someone like Henry Rawlinson or George Smith, men who dedicated their lives to deciphering these enigmatic symbols. Picture the painstaking process: tablets, thousands upon thousands of them, unearthed from buried libraries, archives, and even palace rubbish heaps. Some are fragmented, others remarkably preserved. And as these scholars toiled, often by flickering lamplight, comparing texts, identifying patterns, a lost world began to speak again. It's a truly staggering mainstream historical fact that over 500,000 of these cuneiform tablets have been excavated from Mesopotamia, with estimates suggesting that many hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions, still lie buried. Imagine the sheer volume of information, a snapshot of a civilization that flourished over 5,000 years ago. At first, many of the translations revealed things you might expect from any complex society: records of grain sales, legal contracts, complaints about noisy neighbors, probably lists of kings, and, of course, tax documents. Some things truly are eternal, aren't they? It's almost like discovering that your great-great-great-great-granduncle also had a strongly worded letter to the ancient equivalent of the IRS. But then, amongst these administrative and historical texts, other narratives began to emerge. Epic poems, hymns, myths, stories of creation, of gods and goddesses, of heroes and monsters. And it's within these very tablets, within these ancient stories meticulously etched in clay, that you first encounter a specific group of divine beings, the Anunnaki. The word itself, Anunnaki, often translated as those who from heaven to earth came, or princely offspring, or those of royal blood, starts to appear with intriguing regularity. They are described as a pantheon, powerful deities who played crucial roles in the cosmos and, importantly, in the affairs of humankind. These aren't vague, ethereal spirits. The Sumerian texts depict them with distinct personalities, genealogies, responsibilities, and it must be said, their fair share of divine drama. Think of it as a sort of celestial soap opera, complete with power struggles, romantic entanglements, and the occasional cosmic temper tantrum. One can almost picture them arguing over who left the divine equivalent of the milk carton empty in the heavenly fridge. You're reading, or rather, imagining reading, translations of texts like the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic which has deep Sumerian roots. It tells of cosmic battles, of elder gods and younger gods, of the formation of the heavens and the earth. And then there are texts that speak more directly of the Anunnaki's interactions with the early inhabitants of Mesopotamia. These aren't just abstract theological treatises. They are presented as historical accounts by the Sumerians themselves. They believe these beings were real, that they had walked the earth, that they had decreed fates and established order. A quirky or fringe tidbit you stumble upon is that among the thousands of tablets detailing grand myths and kingly deeds, you also find incredibly detailed astronomical observations, star charts, and mathematical calculations of stunning accuracy. The Sumerians knew of planets invisible to the naked eye, or so some interpretations suggest, and they had a sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. This knowledge, seemingly appearing fully formed, fuels the speculation. Where did they get it? Did they painstakingly develop it over unrecorded millennia? Or was it, as some theories propose, a legacy, a gift, or perhaps just a casually dropped info packet from these Anunnaki? It's like finding a complex circuit diagram scrawled on the back of a kindergarten drawing. Scholars still argue whether the Sumerian Dinger sign, often translated as God, always referred to a supernatural deity in the way we understand it today, or if it could sometimes denote beings of power, rulers, or even shining ones in a more literal, though still extraordinary sense. This linguistic ambiguity is a fascinating wrinkle, allowing for multiple layers of interpretation. Are we talking about gods in a purely mythological sense, personifications of natural forces? Or are these texts hinting at something more tangible, something that fits the description of advanced beings interacting with a less developed culture? The name Anunnaki itself becomes a key, a thread to follow. It's not just a random collection of syllables, it's a designation. And as you trace this name through the layers of Mesopotamian history, from the Sumerians to the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians who followed and absorbed their culture, the Anunnaki remain a constant, albeit evolving, presence. They are sometimes 50, sometimes 7, the 7 who decree. Sometimes they are judges of the dead in the underworld. Sometimes they are skydwellers. Their primary figures include Anu, the supreme lord of the sky, and Lil, lord of the air and earth, often a bit of a grumpy figure but undeniably powerful, and Enki, later known as A, the clever and often human-friendly god of wisdom, magic, and freshwaters. Remember these names. They'll pop up again, like recurring characters in a long-running series. You realize that these clay tablets are not just museum pieces. They are direct messages from the past, penned by scribes who believed implicitly in the stories they were transcribing. They are the foundation upon which later mythologies, perhaps even some religious traditions, were built. To dismiss them as mere fanciful tales is to ignore the profound impact they had on the ancient world and, by extension, on our own. It's like finding the original blueprint for a house you've lived in your whole life, suddenly understanding why certain rooms are shaped the way they are, or why that one staircase creaks in a particular way. The Anunnaki, as they emerge from these baked clay records, are not just literary figures. They are presented as the architects, the original landlords, perhaps even the not-so-silent partners in the grand enterprise of early civilization. And the sheer volume of these texts, the consistency of certain themes, makes you pause and consider. What if, just what if, there's a core of historical truth, however deeply buried under layers of mythological interpretation within these ancient narratives? The clay is no longer silent. It's whispering, and the name it whispers most insistently is Anunnaki. The whispers from those clay tablets have now coalesced into distinct voices, introducing you to a cast of characters so powerful and so alien they could only be described as gods. You're moving deeper into the Sumerian worldview, a realm where the divine and the mundane were not so neatly separated as they often are in our modern conceptions. The Anunnaki aren't just background figures. They are the prime movers, the celestial board of directors, and understanding their hierarchy, their relationships, and their supposed origins is key to understanding their alleged impact on Earth. At the apex of this divine assembly sits Anu, the great father of the gods, the supreme authority. Imagine him as the distant, often aloof, chairman of the board, residing in the highest heaven. His name itself is the Sumerian word for sky or heaven, and his authority, while ultimate, is often delegated. He's not always directly involved in earthly affairs, but his word is law, his decrees final. He's the one you appeal to when all other divine customer service lines are busy. Then there's his son, Enlil, Lord of the Air or Lord of the Command. If Anu is the chairman, Enlil is the CEO, the one who executes policy, manages earthly operations, and isn't afraid to make tough, sometimes ruthless decisions. He's often depicted as a stern, powerful figure, responsible for bestowing kingship upon humans, but also capable of unleashing devastating floods if humanity gets too noisy or steps out of line. He's the kind of boss who doesn't appreciate his employees playing loud music and disturbing the celestial peace. And then there's Enki or Ea in Akkadian and Babylonian traditions, another son of Anu, and perhaps the most intriguing and often human-sympathetic of the leading Anunnaki. He is the god of wisdom, magic, arts, crafts, and crucially, the sweet, life-giving waters of the Abzu or Apsu, the subterranean freshwater ocean. Enki is often portrayed as a brilliant scientist, a master engineer, a cunning trickster, and a benefactor of humankind. While Enlil might be quick to punish, Enki is often the one looking for loopholes, offering advice, and sometimes directly intervening to save humanity from the harsher decrees of his brethren. He's the clever, slightly rebellious uncle who slips you extra candy when your parents aren't looking. The dynamic between Enlil and Enki, often one of rivalry and differing philosophies regarding humanity, forms a central tension in many Sumerian myths. These aren't the only players, of course. There's a whole host of other Anunnaki, each with their own domains and responsibilities, Ninhursag, the mother goddess associated with fertility and birth, who plays a vital role in creation stories. Nana or Sin, the moon god, Utu or Shamash, the sun god and divine judge who sees all. Inanna or Ishtar, the powerful and ambitious goddess of love, fertility, and warfare, who's not afraid to cause a bit of cosmic chaos to get what she wants. It's a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and family squabbles that will make any modern reality TV show pale in comparison. Imagine Thanksgiving dinner with this lot. The arguments over who gets the last divine drumstick could reshape continents. Now, according to the more controversial interpretations, particularly those championed by authors like Zacharias Sitchin, these Anunnaki weren't just from heaven in a vague metaphorical sense. Sitchin, translating and interpreting Sumerian texts, proposed that heaven referred to a specific celestial body, Nibiru. This, he claimed, was a currently undiscovered planet in our own solar system, with a long elliptical orbit of roughly 3,600 Earth years, which periodically brings it into the vicinity of the inner solar system. The Anunnaki, in this view, were the inhabitants of Nibiru, a technologically advanced humanoid race who traveled to Earth in spaceships during one of Nibiru's close passages. It's a dramatic, compelling narrative, placing these gods not in some ethereal spiritual realm, but on a physical planet, making them extraterrestrials in the most literal sense. This is where you really start to wade into the deep end of ancient astronaut theory. Mainstream science, it must be stated clearly, does not recognize the existence of Nibiru as described by Sitchin. There's no astronomical evidence for such a planet with that kind of orbit impacting our solar system in the way he described. However, the idea itself that the heaven of the Anunnaki was a physical place, a home planet, gives their stories a different kind of resonance. It transforms them from purely mythological beings into potential visitors, explorers, or even colonizers. The mainstream historical fact here is that Sumerian cosmology was indeed rich and complex, featuring a multi-layered heaven and earth and detailed genealogies of their gods. They meticulously recorded the movements of the known planets and stars, developing a sophisticated astronomical system that influenced later Babylonian and Greek astronomy. A quirky tidbit arising from these divine hierarchies is the concept of me, pronounced meh. The Mes were a set of fundamental decrees, powers, or divine attributes embodying all the key aspects of civilization, from kingship and priesthood to truth, falsehood, art, music, and even specific crafts like leatherworking and basket weaving. These weren't just abstract concepts. They were described almost as sacred technologies or divine blueprints, which could be held, transferred, and even stolen by gods or goddesses, often leading to significant cosmic upheaval. Imagine Inanna's famous descent to the underworld, where she systematically acquires various mess or stories of Enki carefully guarding them. It's like they were divine software packages that enabled civilization to function. The idea of divine powers being transferable, almost like physical objects or code, is a fascinating departure from more abstract theological concepts. Historians still argue whether the detailed genealogies and personality conflicts attributed to the Sumerian gods are purely literary devices to explain natural phenomena and societal structures, or if they might represent, in a highly mythologized form, the social dynamics and power struggles of early ruling elites, perhaps even reflecting dimly remembered interactions with influential foreign groups. Could the gods have been powerful human kings or queens from a neighboring, more advanced culture, whose deeds became magnified and deified over centuries of oral tradition before being written down? Or is there something more to the tales of their non-earthly origins? The complexity of the Anunnaki pantheon, their all-too-human failings, jealousy, anger, ambition, lust, alongside their immense power and wisdom, makes them compelling. They are not distant, perfect beings. They are flawed, relatable, and terrifyingly potent. Anu, Enlil, Enki, Ninhursag, and Inanna. These names echo down through millennia, their stories shifting and transforming as they were adopted by subsequent cultures, but their core attributes often remaining remarkably consistent. You see their influence in the gods of Babylon, Assyria, and even further afield. It's as if the Sumerians provided the original character sketches for a divine drama that will be reenacted and reinterpreted across the ancient world. And as you learn more about this celestial hierarchy, you begin to wonder about their motivations. If they did come from a place like Nibiru, or indeed any place beyond Earth, what were they doing here? What was their grand plan, their agenda for this small blue planet and its nascent human population? The stage is set with powerful players, and the plot, as you're about to discover, is thickening considerably. Having met the principal players in this cosmic drama, the Anunnaki, with their distinct personalities and their supposed celestial home on Nibiru, you naturally start to wonder about their motives. Why Earth? Of all the planets in all the galaxies, what brought these powerful, technologically advanced beings, if we entertain that interpretation, to our particular neck of the cosmic woods? Was it scientific curiosity? A desire to spread enlightenment? Or was it something far more pragmatic, more resource-driven? This is where the narrative takes a decidedly controversial, yet undeniably compelling turn, largely thanks to the work of Zecharia Sitchin and his interpretation of those Sumerian clay tablets. According to Sitchin's reading of the ancient texts, the Anunnaki didn't stumble upon Earth by accident, nor were they on a purely philanthropic mission. Their primary objective, the driving force behind their arduous journey across the vastness of space, was gold. Yes, gold. Not for its beauty, not for crafting exquisite jewelry to impress the celestial neighbors, and certainly not to back a divine currency. The Anunnaki, Sitchin proposed, needed gold for a far more critical, existential reason: to save their home planet, Nibiru. The theory goes that Nibiru's atmosphere was diminishing, becoming unstable, and its inhabitants, the Anunnaki, had determined that suspending fine gold particles in their upper atmosphere could shield the planet from damaging solar radiation and prevent further atmospheric loss, a kind of planetary sunscreen, if you will. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we talked about metaphorically with the Dogon? Well, this is the galactic, high-stakes version, as so you have these highly advanced beings facing an environmental crisis on their home world, embarking on a desperate, long-shot mission to find and mine significant quantities of this precious metal. Earth, as it turned out, was rich in gold. And so the story unfolds. The Anunnaki leaders, with Enki at the forefront of the initial expeditions, arrived on Earth, surveyed its resources, and established their first base, Eridu, home in the faraway, in Sumer, near the Persian Gulf. Their mission: to extract gold from the waters of the Gulf and, later, from mines in southern Africa. It's a narrative that reframes the gods not as ethereal beings concerned with human worship, but as extraterrestrial miners, engineers, and administrators tasked with a vital, planetary-scale industrial operation. It certainly puts a new spin on the phrase gold rush, doesn't it? Suddenly, those ancient tales of gods descending from the heavens and establishing domains on Earth acquire a very practical, almost corporate subtext. The Sumerian texts, Sitchin argued, are replete with references that support this interpretation. He pointed to terms describing the Anunnaki as those who came from heaven to earth, their specific assignments, their use of tools and flying chariots, and even the toil and eventual rebellion of the rank-and-file Anunnaki who were tasked with the back-breaking labor of mining. It's an audacious theory, one that transforms myth into a kind of historical record of extraterrestrial visitation and resource exploitation. Imagine the Anunnaki foreman grumbling about production quotas and lazy workers, just like any earthly manager, only his hard hat is probably a lot shinier and his commute is interplanetary. The mainstream historical fact is that gold was indeed highly prized in the ancient world, including Mesopotamia. It was used for religious artifacts, royal adornment, and as a symbol of power and divinity. The Sumerians were skilled metallurgists. Archaeological evidence shows sophisticated gold work from very early periods. However, mainstream archaeology attributes the mining and use of gold to human endeavor, driven by these cultural and religious significances, not to an extraterrestrial imperative to save a dying planet. The idea of Anunnaki gold mining operations in, say, South Africa, as proposed by Sitchin and others who point at ancient mine shafts, is not accepted by conventional archaeology, which dates these mines to much later human periods. Yet the theory persists, fueled by what proponents see as suggestive clues. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to this is the so-called African gold mines theory, which suggests that some very ancient mine sites in southern Africa, such as those around Blaubank and an area known as Adam's Calendar, a stone circle formation, are far older than conventionally accepted, potentially dating back tens or even hundreds of thousands of years, and were worked by these Anunnaki gold seekers. These claims are highly contentious and not supported by mainstream geological or archaeological dating, but they form a crucial part of the Anunnaki needed gold narrative. It's the kind of assertion that makes geologists sigh deeply and reach for their textbooks, while alternative theorists lean in with keen interest. Historians still argue whether the Sumerian fascination with and reverence for materials like lapis lazuli, imported from distant Afghanistan, and gold reflected purely aesthetic and status-driven desires, or if these materials were believed to possess specific magical or divine properties that made them essential for rituals or even for sustaining the life force of the gods or the land itself. Was gold just pretty and valuable, or did it hold a deeper, perhaps forgotten significance in their cosmic understanding? This debate touches upon a core of how we interpret ancient value systems. The idea of an Anunnaki gold agenda adds a layer of profound, almost tragic irony to human history if you follow Sitchin's line of thought. Here are these beings coming to Earth to save their own world, and in the process, they will inadvertently, or perhaps intentionally, set in motion the creation of a new sentient species, us, to take over the hard labor. It casts the gods not as benevolent creators in the traditional sense, but as beings with a very specific, self-serving problem that needed solving. The creation of humanity, in this context, becomes less about divine love or companionship and more about a cosmic labor dispute. You can almost picture the scene. The initial Anunnaki miners, perhaps not accustomed to Earth's gravity or conditions, toiling away in harsh environments, their morale dropping, their resentment growing. The texts do speak of the Igigi, a younger generation or a lower rank of gods, who were tasked with this labor and eventually rebelled against Enlil due to the harshness of the work. This rebellion, this labor crisis, according to Sitchin, became the direct catalyst for the next and arguably most significant phase of the Anunnaki presence on Earth, the fashioning of humankind. If they needed gold, and their own workforce was unwilling or unable to procure enough of it, they would need to find or create a new source of labor. The solution, as ingenious as it was ethically questionable, would change the destiny of this planet forever. The search for gold, therefore, wasn't just about economics or planetary repair. It was the prologue to our own existence. The gleam of that precious metal, sought for reasons far beyond our ancient ancestors' comprehension, may have been the very spark that ignited the flame of human consciousness, according to this extraordinary and highly debated interpretation of our past. The cosmic gold rush, as envisioned through Sitchin's lens, has reached a critical juncture. The Anunnaki, having traveled light years, or at least a very long orbital path from Nibiru, find themselves with a labor problem. The Igigi, those junior Anunnaki tasked with the grueling work of digging for gold, have, quite understandably, had enough. You can almost hear their celestial chants, "No more pickaxes. We want better working conditions. And maybe a decent benefits package." This divine strike, this cosmic walkout, presents a serious challenge to the Anunnaki leadership, particularly to Enlil, who is in charge of the Earth mission. If the gold doesn't flow, Nibiru's atmosphere doesn't get its life-saving metallic sheen. What's a god commander to do? This is where Enki, the brilliant scientist, the master of genetics, at least in these interpretations, steps forward with a truly radical proposal. His idea: let's create a primitive worker, a Lulu Amalu, an Adamantisu or Earthling, by modifying the genetic makeup of an existing hominid already evolving on Earth, perhaps Homo erectus or a similar species. They wouldn't create life from scratch, but rather upgrade or engineer what was already there, imprinting their own essence or genetic material onto this native creature to make it intelligent enough to understand instructions and capable enough to perform the labor. This is the core of the Anunnaki creation of man story, a narrative that echoes in a fascinatingly distorted way through numerous ancient myths, including, some would argue, the biblical account in Genesis. You are now privy to the discussions in the Anunnaki Council, the debates between Enlil, ever pragmatic and concerned with order, and Enki, the innovator, perhaps more curious about the scientific possibilities. Ninhursag, also known as Ninti or Mami, the chief medical officer and geneticist of the Anunnaki, plays a crucial role here. She is the one who, with Enki's guidance and using her profound knowledge of life processes, would undertake the delicate, complex task of genetic manipulation. The texts describe a process involving mixing the clay of the earth, perhaps a metaphor for the physical body of the hominid, with the blood or essence of a young Anunnaki god, and gestating the first prototypes within Anunnaki females, the birth goddesses. It's a vivid, almost clinical description, far removed from a god, simply speaking a creature into existence. It sounds more like a high-tech genetics lab than a divine fiat. Imagine the scene, not in a heavenly garden, but perhaps in a sterile, well-lit chamber deep within the Anunnaki Earth base. Enki and Ninhursag, surrounded by equipment you can only guess at, working diligently. There are trials, errors, imperfect creations mentioned in the texts, beings with defects, creatures not quite right, before they finally achieve a successful model, the Dappa or model man. This new being is intelligent enough to serve, but crucially, not initially created to be immortal or to procreate independently, at least not in the earliest versions. Those capabilities would come later, perhaps by accident, perhaps by Enki's further unsanctioned meddling. It's like they were beta testing humanity, and version 1.0 had a few bugs and missing features. The mainstream historical fact is that ancient Mesopotamian mythology, particularly the Atrahasis epic and other creation texts, does indeed describe the creation of humankind by gods to relieve them of their toil. In these accounts, the goddess Mami Ninhursag creates humans from clay mixed with the blood and flesh of a slain god, so that humans can bear the workload of the gods, specifically digging canals and maintaining the agricultural system. The parallels are striking, even if the interpretation of gods as extraterrestrials is Sitchin's specific contribution. The core idea of humans being created as servants for divine beings is right there in the ancient cuneiform. A quirky or fringe tidbit that often surfaces in these discussions is the concept of junk DNA. Modern genetics has revealed that a large percentage of our DNA doesn't code for proteins and was once dismissed as junk. Some ancient astronaut theorists have provocatively suggested that this junk DNA might not be junk at all, but could contain dormant genetic material, perhaps even Anunnaki gene sequences or untapped potentials, waiting for a specific trigger or a future understanding to unlock them. It's a wild idea, of course, with no current scientific backing, but it's the kind of speculation that adds a layer of what if to our genetic blueprint. It's like finding an old encrypted file on your computer. You don't know what it is, but you can't quite bring yourself to delete it. Scholars still argue whether the Mesopotamian creation myths, with their themes of divine labor and human servitude, primarily reflect the social realities of ancient Sumer, a hierarchical society dependent on agricultural labor and large-scale irrigation projects managed by a priestly or kingly class, or if they preserve a more ancient, perhaps even pre-Sumerian, memory of a profound shift in human consciousness or capability. Was the creation a metaphor for the dawn of agriculture and settled civilization, where humanity took on the yoke of the gods, i.e., the organizing principles of society? Or is it a garbled account of a more literal intervention? This genetic blueprint theory, if you entertain it, has profound implications. It means humanity is, in a very real sense, a hybrid species, a product of both terrestrial evolution and extraterrestrial genetic engineering. It positions us not as the pinnacle of an independent evolutionary trajectory, but as a purposefully designed workforce. It's a humbling, perhaps even unsettling thought. It also reframes our relationship with our creators. Were they benevolent parents or simply pragmatic employers who saw a resource to be exploited and then, perhaps, developed a more complex relationship with their creation? The text suggests a bit of both. Enki, for instance, often seems to have a soft spot for his handiwork, sometimes acting as a secret benefactor, even warning humanity of Enlil's plan to destroy them with a great flood. The success of the Adamu project, the creation of these primitive workers, solved the Anunnaki labor crisis. Gold production presumably ramps up, but it also opens a Pandora's box of new complexities. These new beings, while initially limited, begin to develop. They learn, they adapt, and crucially, they begin to multiply, sometimes intermingling with their Anunnaki masters, a detail that also finds echoes in various mythologies, including the biblical story of the sons of God and the daughters of men. The Anunnaki, it seems, had not only created a workforce, but had also kick-started a new chapter in planetary evolution, one whose script they might not entirely control. The genetic die was cast, and the consequences would ripple through the ages, shaping not just the destiny of humankind, but also the ongoing saga of the Anunnaki themselves on planet Earth. The story of the Anunnaki fashioning humanity as a workforce, using their own genetic blueprint on a native hominid, is a provocative one, rooted deeply in those Sumerian clay tablets. But as you broaden your gaze, lifting your eyes from the dusty plains of Mesopotamia, you begin to notice something remarkable. This theme of divine beings, creators from the sky or from a previous world, playing a direct, often physical role in the emergence of humankind isn't unique to Sumer. It's like a melody that, once you recognize it, you start hearing in variations played by different orchestras across the globe. You find echoes, sometimes faint, sometimes strikingly clear, in the mythologies of ancient cultures separated by vast oceans and millennia. Consider the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the ancient Quiche Maya of Guatemala. It tells a complex creation story where the gods, Tepu and Gucumatz, also known as Kukulkan or Quetzalcoatl in other Mesoamerican cultures, make several attempts to create beings who can worship them and keep the days. Their first attempts fail. Creatures of mud dissolve, wooden figures are mindless and ungrateful. Sound familiar? That trial and error process we saw with Enki and Ninhursag? Finally, they succeed by fashioning humans from maize dough, a staple crop vital to Mesoamerican civilization. These beings are intelligent. They can speak. They can remember their creators. While materials are different, clay and divine blood in Sumer, maize in Mesoamerica, the underlying concept of gods as active, experimenting artisans of humanity is strikingly similar. It's as if different cultures use their most vital local ingredients to describe the same fundamental recipe for making people. Then you journey, in your mind's eye, to ancient Egypt. Here, the god Khnum, the ram-headed deity of the Nile's cataracts, is often depicted as a divine potter, fashioning human bodies on his potter's wheel and placing them into the wombs of mothers. His consort, Hecate, the frog-headed goddess of fertility, then breathes life into them. Again, a direct, hands-on creation by a divine entity. Or think of the Greek myth of Prometheus, a titan who, against the will of Zeus, creates mankind from clay and water and then, much like Enki's benevolent streak, steals fire from the gods to give to his creation, empowering them. For this act of rebellious compassion, Prometheus is famously punished, chained to a rock where an eagle eats his liver daily, a rather extreme form of divine HR disciplinary action. Across the Pacific, in Polynesian traditions, you find Maui, the great culture hero and demigod, who is said to have fished up islands from the sea and, in some tales, played a role in the creation or improvement of humans. In Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime stories, ancestral beings, powerful creator spirits, are said to have shaped the landscape and brought forth all living things, including the first humans, during a formative creation period. These spirits often emerged from the earth or descended from the sky, and their actions are an ongoing, living presence in the land and its people. The mainstream historical fact is that creation myths are a virtually universal feature of human cultures. Anthropologists and mythologists have long studied these narratives, categorizing their common themes, such as creation from chaos, from a cosmic egg, from the dismembered body of a primordial being, or, as we're focusing on, by divine artisans. These stories serve to explain origins, establish social order, and define a culture's relationship with the cosmos and the divine. They are seen as metaphorical expressions of a people's understanding of their place in the universe. But what if some of these metaphors are more literal than we've been taught to believe? What if the ancestral beings or sky gods weren't just personifications of natural forces, but dimly remembered folk memories of actual, powerful entities who interacted with early humans? A quirky or fringe tidbit in this vein is the persistence of cargo cults in some Melanesian societies. These arose particularly after contact with technologically advanced Westerners during World War II, when islanders witnessed soldiers receiving vast amounts of goods, cargo, from airplanes and ships. Some cults developed rituals, building mock airstrips and imitation airplanes, believing these practices would magically attract more cargo and bring back the powerful beings who delivered it. While a modern phenomenon, it offers a fascinating, albeit simplified, analogy. Could ancient encounters with highly advanced sky beings, the Anunnaki or others, have led to similar deification and the development of rituals aimed at honoring or propitiating these powerful visitors, their deeds later codified into creation myths? It's like ancient peoples trying to download more divine software by building symbolic modems. Historians still argue whether the striking similarities in creation myths across disparate and geographically isolated ancient cultures are evidence of a universal human psychological archetype, as Carl Jung might suggest with his concept of the collective unconscious, the result of cultural diffusion along ancient, unrecorded trade and migration routes, or, as ancient astronaut theorists propose, indicative of a shared historical experience involving common extraterrestrial creators or influences. It's a classic chicken or the egg scenario. Did the story spread, or did similar events happen in different places, leading to similar stories? The recurrence of themes like trial and error in creation, the use of earthly materials combined with a divine element, the idea of humanity being fashioned for a purpose, often servitude or worship, and even divine beings intermingling with humans is quite remarkable. It's as if there's a foundational narrative, a common ancestral story that has been adapted and reskinned by different cultures using their own unique symbolism and local color. From the clay of Sumer to the maze of the Maya, from the potter's wheel of Khnum to the ingenuity of Prometheus, the message seems to be, you were made intentionally by beings far more powerful than yourselves. This global tapestry of creator gods doesn't necessarily prove the Anunnaki theory, of course, but it does create a compelling context. It suggests that the Sumerian accounts, far from being an isolated anomaly, might be one of the most detailed and well-preserved versions of a story that humanity has been telling itself, in various forms, for millennia. It's as if the Anunnaki or beings like them weren't just a regional phenomenon in Mesopotamia, but part of a wider, perhaps even planetary interaction. The idea that our origins might be intertwined with these worldwide creators broadens the scope of the mystery exponentially, suggesting that the story of humanity's beginning is far more complex and interconnected than we might ever have imagined. The echoes are everywhere, if you know how to listen. The echoes of these creator gods, these Anunnaki or similar beings, reverberate not just through the myths and legends passed down in clay tablets and oral traditions, but also, some argue, through the very stones and artifacts left behind by ancient civilizations. You find yourself now standing before colossal structures, pondering intricate objects that seem to whisper tales of lost technologies and impossible knowledge. It's one thing to hear stories of God shaping humanity. It's another to seemingly touch the handiwork of a power that defies conventional explanation. This is the realm of OP arts, out-of-place artifacts, and megalithic marvels that make you scratch your head and mutter, "How on earth did they do that?" Consider the massive stone blocks of Pumapunku in Bolivia, part of the Tiwanaku temple complex near Lake Titicaca. These andesite and red sandstone blocks are cut with such precision, featuring incredibly fine, straight edges, perfectly flat surfaces, and complex interlocking joints, that they look almost machine-made. Some blocks weigh over 100 tons. The conventional archaeological explanation involves skilled Tiwanaku artisans using stone tools, llama fiber ropes, and immense manpower over centuries. And indeed, ancient peoples were incredibly ingenious and capable. Yet the sheer scale and exactitude, particularly with a hard andesite, pushes the boundaries of what seems feasible with the known toolkit of the time, around 500–1000 AD. It's like trying to build a Swiss watch using only a hammer and chisel, possible perhaps for a genius, but extraordinarily difficult. Then you travel, in your mind, to Baalbek in Lebanon. The Roman temples there are built upon a much older stone platform, which includes 3 colossal stones known as the Trilithon. Each of these monoliths is estimated to weigh around 800 tons. And beneath them, in the nearby quarry, lies the stone of the pregnant woman, Hajar al-Hibla, an even larger, partially excavated block tipping the scales at an estimated 1,000 to 1,200 tons. And another, even larger one nearby, perhaps 1,650 tons. How are such immense stones quarried, transported, and lifted into place? Mainstream archaeology suggests Roman engineering prowess, using levers, rollers, capstans, and vast teams of laborers. The Romans were incredible engineers, no doubt. The mainstream historical fact is that Roman construction techniques, documented by engineers like Vitruvius, were highly advanced, capable of creating structures like the Pantheon and extensive aqueduct systems. They understood leverage, cranes, and concrete. However, the scale of Baalbek's largest stone strains even Roman capabilities to their limits, leading some to speculate that the Romans built upon a pre-existing, even more ancient megalithic foundation, possibly constructed by a civilization with access to, or knowledge of, some form of advanced lifting or stone-softening technology, perhaps, the theorists whisper, the Anunnaki themselves, who were said to have raised great cities. It's a bit like finding the foundations of a skyscraper made of perfectly cut 100-ton granite blocks, and then finding a Roman villa built on top. You'd admire the villa, but you'd really want to know who laid those foundations. And what about the intricate artifacts? Remember the Antikythera mechanism we touched on earlier? That 2nd century BCE Greek device, often called the first analog computer, with its complex system of bronze gears, predicted astronomical positions and eclipses with remarkable accuracy. Its sophistication was unmatched for over 1,000 years. Or consider the Saqqara bird, a small wooden artifact found in a tomb in Saqqara, Egypt, dating to around 200 BCE. Shaped like a bird, some have controversially suggested it resembles a glider or airplane, citing its aerodynamic proportions and a missing tailplane that might have acted as a rudder. While most Egyptologists identify it as a falcon figurine or a weather vane, its unusual shape keeps the ancient flight debate simmering. It's probably not a tiny drone from an Anunnaki hobbyist, but it does make for a fun what if. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the existence of geopolymers as a potential explanation for some ancient stone-cutting mysteries. Professor Joseph Davidovits, a French materials scientist, proposed that some ancient blocks, like those in certain Egyptian pyramids or at Pumapunku, weren't entirely carved from natural stone but were cast from a type of ancient concrete or geopolymer, essentially reconstituted man-made stone. This would explain the precision and the tight fits. While this theory is not widely accepted in mainstream archaeology for many major sites, it offers an alternative technological pathway that doesn't necessarily require laser beams or anti-gravity, but still implies a very high level of chemical and material science knowledge. It's like discovering your ancient ancestors were masters of DIY concrete long before Home Depot existed. Historians still argue whether the presence of so-called impossible artifacts and megalithic structures truly necessitates an appeal to lost advanced technologies or extraterrestrial intervention, or if they primarily demonstrate the remarkable, often underestimated, ingenuity, patience, and organizational capabilities of ancient human societies working with simpler tools over extended periods. It's a debate about human potential versus unexplained anomalies. Are we selling our ancestors short by assuming they couldn't achieve these feats without outside help? Or are we being too conservative by refusing to consider more extraordinary possibilities when faced with such monumental enigmas? These structures and objects, from the precise cuts at Puma Punku to the colossal stones of Baalbek, from the Antikythera mechanism to the enigmatic dendrolites, Egyptian temple carvings that some interpret as giant light bulbs, though mainstream Egyptology identifies them as mythological scenes involving a lotus flower and a snake, create a sense of wonder and unease. They stand as silent witnesses, challenging our assumptions about the past. They don't scream aliens, necessarily, but they do invite us to question the completeness of our historical narrative. If the Anunnaki or beings like them were indeed present on Earth, establishing operations, building cities, as the Sumerian texts claim, wouldn't we expect to find some physical evidence of their advanced capabilities? Perhaps these megalithic puzzles and out-of-place artifacts are precisely that evidence, misinterpreted or not yet fully understood, like finding a discarded alien power tool used as a very effective, if slightly oversized, paperweight. The stones themselves might not speak, but the questions they raise are loud and clear. The questions raised by those silent stones and perplexing artifacts naturally lead you to wonder if these creator gods, these Anunnaki, possess such advanced capabilities. How do they get around? Did they trudge through the mud like the primitive workers they allegedly created? Or did they, as befits beings from heaven, have more sophisticated means of transport? You delve back into the ancient texts, not just Sumerian, but from cultures worldwide, and you find intriguing, persistent descriptions of gods and heroes soaring through the skies in remarkable vehicles. These aren't just poetic metaphors for the sun and moon. They are often detailed accounts of what sounds suspiciously like flying machines. The most famous examples perhaps come from the ancient Indian epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. These texts, dating back thousands of years in their oral traditions, describe vimanas, flying chariots or palaces used by gods and heroes. The descriptions are often surprisingly technical, mentioning various types of vimanas, their propulsion systems, sometimes involving mercury or powerful mantras, their maneuverability, and even their use in warfare, complete with devastating weaponry. Some passages read like excerpts from a flight manual or an aerial combat report. You might find references to vimanas that could travel vast distances, hover, become invisible, and unleash arrows that caused immense destruction. It's a far cry from a simple horse-drawn chariot. Imagine reading an ancient text that describes something akin to a modern fighter jet, complete with targeting systems and countermeasures. It would certainly make you sit up and take notice. Then you look back to the Sumerian and Babylonian texts. While perhaps not as explicitly technical as some Vimana descriptions, there are plenty of references to the gods traveling in skyboats, celestial barges, or having storm chariots. Enlil is often associated with storms and wind, and his decrees are carried swiftly. The god Shamash Utu in Sumerian, the sun god, was said to traverse the heavens daily in his chariot, seeing all. While often interpreted metaphorically, within the ancient astronaut framework, these descriptions take on a more literal hue. Could these chariots and boats be stylized recollections of actual aerial vehicles? The Anunnaki, after all, were those who from heaven to earth came. Presumably, they didn't just teleport. They needed transport. Even in the Old Testament, you find the famous vision of the prophet Ezekiel. He describes a whirlwind coming from the north, a great cloud with fire unfolding, and in its midst, the likeness of four living creatures with wheels within wheels, moving in any direction without turning, accompanied by a firmament like terrible ice, and above it, a throne with a figure of human appearance. While traditionally interpreted as a divine revelation, a symbolic vision of God's glory, ancient astronaut proponents see in Ezekiel's detailed, almost bewildered description an encounter with a sophisticated, perhaps extraterrestrial, aircraft and its occupants. The wheels within wheels and the multi-directional movement are particularly suggestive of advanced technology. It's like someone from the Bronze Age trying to describe a helicopter or a complex drone. The vocabulary simply isn't there, so they resort to the closest analogies they can find. The mainstream historical fact is that depictions of winged deities and celestial beings are common in ancient art and mythology across many cultures. For example, the Assyrians, inheritors of Mesopotamian culture, frequently depicted winged genii and gods, often flanking sacred trees or kings. These wings symbolize divinity, power, and the ability to transcend the earthly realm. Mainstream interpretation views these as symbolic representations of spiritual or divine attributes, not literal flying capabilities of flesh and blood beings and machines. A quirky or fringe tidbit concerns the Abydos helicopter hieroglyphs. In the Temple of Seti I in Abydos, Egypt, a section of carved hieroglyphs on a lintel, when viewed in a certain way, appears to show modern-looking aircraft, helicopter, a submarine or spaceship, and perhaps a jet plane. These images are widely circulated in ancient astronaut circles as proof of ancient knowledge of such technologies. The conventional Egyptological explanation is that these shapes are the result of palimpsest, older hieroglyphs being plastered over and recarved with new ones, and over time, as the plaster eroded, elements of both sets of inscriptions became visible, coincidentally creating these suggestive shapes. It's a classic case of pareidolia, seeing familiar patterns in random data versus what if. It's like seeing a face in the clouds, but this face has rotor blades and a tail fin. Historians still argue whether ancient descriptions of flying chariots, skyboats, or divine ascents and descents are purely mythological expressions of power and connection to the celestial realm, or if some of these accounts might be garbled, eyewitness testimonies of advanced aerial technology, filtered through the lens of a pre-scientific worldview. Were these just poetic flights of fancy, or were there actual flights involved? The idea of gods possessing flying machines neatly ties into the Anunnaki narrative. If they were an advanced race from another planet, or even just a technologically superior terrestrial civilization, having aerial transport for exploration, surveying, movement between settlements like Eridu and Sumer and mining operations in Africa, and perhaps even for displays of power will be entirely logical. These vehicles wouldn't necessarily be for intergalactic travel. Those would be the motherships or larger interstellar craft, presumably left in orbit or on Nibiru, but rather for atmospheric flight on Earth. You picture the scene, early humans, perhaps Homo erectus or early Homo sapiens, witnessing these beings descending from the sky in gleaming, noisy contraptions. The awe, the fear, the sheer incomprehensibility of it would undoubtedly lead to deification. The beings emerging from these chariots of the gods would naturally be seen as gods themselves. Their vehicles will become symbols of their power, their journeys woven into the fabric of myth. The roar of an engine becomes the rumble of a storm god's chariot. The gleam of metal becomes the radiance of a celestial being. The stories of Vimanas, of Ezekiel's wheels, of Anunnaki skyboats, all start to sound less like fantastical inventions and more like attempts to describe the indescribable, to capture a glimpse of a technology so far beyond contemporary understanding that it could only be framed in divine terms. The gods, it seems, weren't just walking the earth. They were soaring above it, leaving trails of wonder and myth in their wake. The Anunnaki, having established their presence, engineered their workforce, and zipped around in their celestial chariots, seem to have had a long and complex relationship with Earth and its burgeoning human population. But this relationship wasn't always harmonious. Just as their own internal politics were fraught with drama. Remember Enlil and Enki's differing approaches? Their stewardship of humanity was marked by periods of favor and, at times, profound displeasure. This brings you to one of the most widespread and cataclysmic myths found across countless cultures, the Great Flood, the Deluge. And in the Sumerian version, the Anunnaki play a central and rather unsettling role. According to texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh, which includes the famous flood story of Utnapishtim, and the earlier Atrahasis epic, the decision to wipe out humankind with a devastating flood came from the Council of the Great Gods, specifically at the instigation of Enlil. Why such a drastic measure? The reasons given are a bit murky but often boil down to humanity becoming too numerous and too noisy. Their clamor, their sheer proliferation, was disturbing the peace of the gods, particularly Enlil, who seemed to have a low tolerance for earthly racket. It's like your celestial landlord deciding to fumigate the entire apartment building because the tenants in the downstairs flat are playing their music too loud. A slight overreaction, perhaps? So the Anunnaki Council, with Anu's consent, decrees the destruction of mankind. However, one god, our old friend Enki Ea in the Babylonian versions, had a soft spot for his creations. He's also not entirely on board with Enlil's plan, perhaps seeing it as wasteful or unjust. Bound by an oath not to directly reveal the god's plan to humans, Enki resorts to a clever bit of divine subterfuge. He speaks to a reed hut, knowing that inside that hut is a righteous man, Utnapishtim, or Atrahasis in the earlier version. Enki advises the wall of the hut to dismantle your house, build a boat, forsake possessions, and save life. He gives Utnapishtim precise instructions on how to build a massive ark, to seal it with bitumen, and to take aboard his family, craftsmen, and the seed of all living things. Then the cataclysm is unleashed. The texts describe it with terrifying vividness, a furious storm, torrential rains, the dikes of the canals bursting, the land submerged. Even the gods themselves are described as being frightened by the ferocity of the flood they have unleashed, cowering like dogs. For 6 days and 7 nights in the Gilgamesh account, the deluge rages, wiping out all life on earth that isn't aboard the ark. When the waters finally begin to recede, Utnapishtim's boat comes to rest on a mountaintop, Mount Nimish or Nizur. He sends out a dove, then a swallow, then a raven to see if the land is dry. When the raven doesn't return, he knows it's safe to emerge. He offers a sacrifice, and the gods, smelling the sweet savor, gather around. Enlil is initially furious that some humans have survived, but Enki manages to pacify him, arguing for a more nuanced approach to controlling human population in the future, perhaps through disease, famine, or wild animals, rather than wholesale annihilation. A rather grim compromise, but humanity gets a second chance. The mainstream historical fact is that the Mesopotamian flood story, particularly as preserved in the Epic of Gilgamesh, has profound similarities to the biblical story of Noah's Ark in Genesis. The discovery of the Gilgamesh flood tablet by George Smith in the 19th century caused a sensation, as it predated the biblical account by many centuries and suggested a common source or a widespread ancient Near Eastern tradition of a great flood. Geologists and archaeologists have indeed found evidence of significant, localized river floods in ancient Mesopotamia, some of which could have been devastating enough to inspire such epic narratives that, over time, grew into a worldwide cataclysm in the mythological retelling. Quirky or fringe tidbit connected to flood myths is the theory of hydroplate tectonics, or various catastrophic pole shift theories, which attempt to provide a global physical mechanism for a worldwide flood far exceeding any localized river inundation. These theories, not accepted by mainstream geology, often invoke cometary impacts, sudden crustal displacements, or other dramatic Earth changes to explain how the entire globe could have been submerged. It's an attempt to find a scientific basis for what is generally considered a mythological event, moving it from the realm of legend into the realm of planetary disaster science. Think of it as trying to reverse engineer the physics of a divinely ordained apocalypse. Historians still argue whether the near-universal presence of great flood myths in cultures around the world, from the Americas to India, Australia to Europe, each with local variations but a core theme of watery destruction and a few chosen survivors, is evidence of a single, global cataclysmic event in distant prehistory, or if it represents a common human psychological response to the destructive power of water, local floods, tsunamis, storms, that independently generated similar archetypal stories. Could it be a collective memory of the rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age, which would have dramatically reshaped coastlines and submerged human settlements over millennia, being compressed into a single dramatic event? Or, as the Anunnaki narrative suggests, was it a deliberate act by powerful beings, a reset button pressed on the human experiment? The Anunnaki's role in the flood story is particularly telling. They are not just passive observers or forces of nature. They are active agents, making conscious decisions with profound consequences. Enlil, the stern enforcer, Enki, the reluctant savior and trickster. Their actions reveal their power, but also their fallibility, their disagreements, and their complex, almost parental, but certainly proprietary attitude toward humanity. The flood isn't just a natural disaster. It's a divine intervention, a calling. It marks a critical turning point in the relationship between gods and humans. The noisy and prolific first batch of humanity is largely wiped out, and a new era begins with the survivors, who are perhaps more aware of the gods' power and their own precarious position. This division, the separation of humanity into a pre-flood and post-flood epoch, is a significant theme. The world is irrevocably changed. The knowledge and perhaps even the lifespan of pre-flood humans are often depicted as greater, something lost in the cataclysm. The Anunnaki, having nearly erased their creation, now have to decide how to proceed with the remnants. The floodwaters recede, leaving behind a world scoured clean, a blank slate upon which a new chapter of human and Anunnaki interaction will be written. The survivors emerge from the Ark into a changed world, forever marked by the memory of the waters and the awesome, terrible power of their creators. The waters have receded. Utnapishtim, or Noah, or Deucalion, or Manu, whatever name the local tradition gives the sole survivor, steps out of the Ark onto damp, muddy, and eerily silent ground. The world has been cleansed, reset. But what happens next? If the Anunnaki or their counterparts in other myths were so invested in Earth, so involved in human affairs up to the point of orchestrating a near-total annihilation, it's unlikely they just packed up their celestial chariots and said, "Well, that was a bit much, let's leave them to it now." You begin to ponder how civilizations re-emerged from this watery desolation, and whether these creator figures played a role in the Great Rebuilding. In the Mesopotamian narratives after the flood, the gods, perhaps a little chastened by the sheer destructive power they unleashed, and maybe missing the sacrifices and service from humanity, re-establish a kind of modus vivendi with the survivors. Kingship is once again lowered from heaven, and new cities begin to rise from the mud. There's a sense of a new covenant, a new set of rules for engagement between gods and mortals. The Anunnaki, while perhaps more cautious or at least more subtle in their interactions, don't just disappear. They are still present, still influencing the course of human events, guiding the re-establishment of order and civilization. It's like a landlord who, after a very destructive fumigation, helps the remaining tenants rebuild, but with much stricter lease agreements this time. Think about the sheer challenge facing the survivors. Not just the trauma of the event, but the loss of accumulated knowledge, infrastructure, and social organization. How do you restart civilization from scratch or near scratch? The myths often speak of culture heroes, demigods, or wise sages who appear in this post-Diluvian world to teach humanity the arts of agriculture, law, writing, and city building anew. In many traditions, these figures are explicitly linked to the gods, or are gods themselves in a more benevolent, instructive guise. Enki, for example, in Sumerian lore, is always the teacher, the bringer of civilization's arts and craft, the mess we talked about. It's plausible that he and others like him would have been instrumental in guiding humanity's second attempt at building a complex society. It's like they had the backup files for Civilization 2.0 ready to install. You might consider the various king lists from ancient Sumer, which often list rulers who reigned for incredibly long periods before the flood, and then a new series of kings with more, shall we say, human-scale lifespans after the flood. This division again emphasizes the flood as a major demarcation point. The post-flood era is depicted as a time of rebuilding, of re-establishing societal structures, often under divine patronage. The gods grant kingship. They lay out the plans for temples, which were not just religious centers but also administrative and economic hubs, and they provide the essential knowledge for society to function and flourish. The mainstream historical fact is that archaeological records do show evidence of widespread societal collapse and regeneration in various parts of the world throughout history, though not necessarily a single global flood event that reset everything simultaneously. For instance, the end of the early Bronze Age in the Near East around 2200 BCE was marked by urban decline and population shifts, possibly due to climatic changes, followed by a period of recovery and the rise of new political entities. These historical cycles of collapse and renewal, on smaller or regional scales, could have contributed to the archetypal myth of a great cataclysm followed by a rebuilding phase under divine guidance. The memory of a particularly devastating local flood, for instance, could easily become the seed for a much grander story of worldwide destruction and divinely aided rebirth. Quirky or fringe tidbit that ties into this theme of post-flood rebuilding under divine guidance is the legend of Oannes in Babylonian tradition, as recounted by the 3rd century BCE priest Berossus. Oannes was an amphibious being, a man-fish, who was said to have emerged from the Erythraean Sea, Persian Gulf, after the flood. During the day, he would teach humanity writing, arts, and sciences, all the things that make for the taming of life, but he would not eat with humans and would return to the sea at night. Several such beings, known as Apkallu, sages or wise ones, were said to have appeared in the post-flood era, bringing crucial knowledge. To ancient astronaut theorists, Oannes and the Apkallu sound suspiciously like a description of a non-human, perhaps amphibious, instructor, or a being in some kind of environmental suit, sharing knowledge with the traumatized survivors. It's like technical support arriving after a system-wide crash, dressed in rather unusual attire. Historians still argue whether the post-Diluvian culture-bringer figures found in many mythologies, like Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, who brought learning and civilization after a previous world's destruction, represent actual historical individuals who were later deified for their contributions, are purely mythological personifications of societal progress. Or if they could be folk memories of contact with more advanced groups, perhaps the Anunnaki or similar entities, who helped kickstart civilization anew after a period of significant disruption. Were these teachers simply wise human leaders, or something more? The narrative of rebuilding after the rains, with divine assistance, offers a kind of hope, a sense that even after immense destruction, life and civilization can reemerge, often stronger and wiser. But it also reinforces the idea of continued dependence on, or at least interaction with, these powerful creator figures. They didn't just create and abandon. They continued to manage, to guide, to influence. Perhaps the knowledge they imparted was selective, tailored to ensure humanity developed along lines that suited the Anunnaki's own long-term plans. Maybe certain technologies were reintroduced, while others were deliberately withheld. You can imagine the Anunnaki surveying the post-flood world, seeing it as an opportunity to implement a more refined version of their Earth project. The noisy element had been dealt with. Now they could cultivate a more compliant, perhaps more organized human society. The cities that rose in Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, with their ziggurats reaching towards the heavens, their complex bureaucracies, their astronomical knowledge, might be seen, in this light, not just as human achievements, but as joint ventures, guided by an unseen or perhaps not so unseen divine hand. The rebuilding wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about re-establishing a cosmic order, with humanity playing its designated role, a role perhaps subtly redefined by the lessons of the Great Flood and the continued presence of their formidable and now demonstrably destructive creators. So far, you journey through a landscape rich with tantalizing possibilities, ancient astronauts, divine genetic engineering, flying vimanas, and a great flood orchestrated by unhappy celestial landlords. It's a narrative that challenges the very foundations of conventional history. But now, you must inevitably encounter the formidable fortress of mainstream scholarly scrutiny. How do historians, archaeologists, linguists, and scientists respond to these extraordinary claims about the Anunnaki and ancient aliens? Is it a case of debunking based on solid evidence and rigorous methodology, or, as some proponents of these theories suggest, is there an element of hiding or ignoring uncomfortable truths that don't fit the established paradigm? The overwhelming consensus within mainstream academia is that the ancient astronaut hypothesis, including Zecharia Sitchin's specific interpretations of Sumerian texts regarding the Anunnaki and Nibiru, lacks credible evidence and relies on misinterpretations of ancient texts and archaeological data. Scholars of Sumerian language and cuneiform, for example, argue that Sitchin's translations are often idiosyncratic, taking words out of context or assigning them meanings that are not supported by broader linguistic understanding. They contend that terms Sitchin translates as rockets or spaceships have more mundane, accepted translations related to agricultural tools, mythological symbolism, or conventional rulership. For instance, the term mu or shumu, which Sitchin sometimes interpreted as a skyborne vehicle, is generally understood by Sumerologists to mean name, lineage, year, or command, depending on context. It's like insisting that every time an ancient text mentions a bright star, it must be a UFO, rather than, say, Venus. Archaeologists, similarly, point out that there's no unambiguous physical evidence of advanced, non-human technology in ancient sites. The impossible artifact we discussed, like the Antikythera mechanism or the Saqqara bird, while fascinating, have plausible, though sometimes still debated, explanations within the context of human ingenuity and known historical technological development. The Antikythera mechanism, for instance, while incredibly advanced for its time, is seen as a testament to the lost sophistication of Hellenistic Greek engineering, not alien intervention. Mainstream archaeology emphasizes the long, gradual development of human skills and knowledge, rather than sudden leaps inspired by extraterrestrial tutors. The mainstream historical fact is that archaeological dating methods, like radiocarbon dating and stratigraphy, provide a consistent timeline for human development that generally doesn't require sudden infusions of alien technology to explain major transitions like the rise of agriculture or cities. These were long, complex processes with regional variations. When it comes to structures like Puma Punku or Baalbek, while acknowledging the impressive skill involved, mainstream researchers emphasize the capabilities of organized human labor, simple machines, levers, rollers, ramps, and long timescales. They point to experimental archaeology projects that have successfully replicated aspects of ancient construction techniques, demonstrating that seemingly impossible feats could be achieved with known ancient methods, even if the exact techniques used at specific sites remain a subject of ongoing research and debate. It's often a case of underestimating our ancestors' capabilities rather than needing to invoke lost supertech. Remember how much effort it took to build even a medieval cathedral with basic tools, yet they stand as magnificent testaments to human skill and perseverance. So, is this just straightforward debunking? From the perspective of mainstream scholars, yes, they see their role as upholding rigorous standards of evidence and interpretation. They argue that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence and that ancient astronaut theories, while imaginative, simply don't meet that bar. They see the appeal to gods from outer space as a modern myth, a reinterpretation of ancient stories through a 20th and 21st century technological lens, rather than understanding them within their original cultural and religious contexts. However, from the viewpoint of many ancient astronaut proponents, this scholarly consensus can sometimes feel like a form of intellectual gatekeeping, a reluctance to engage with challenging ideas, or even a deliberate suppression of evidence that might overturn established narratives. They might ask, if a Sumerian tablet describes gods descending from the sky in fiery chariots, why is it automatically assumed to be purely metaphorical? Why isn't the possibility of a literal, albeit anciently described, technological event considered more seriously? This is where the hiding or ignoring accusation sometimes comes in. It's not necessarily a conscious conspiracy they allege, but rather an institutional inertia, a bias towards conservative interpretations, and a tendency to dismiss anomalies rather than investigate them with an open mind. A quirky or fringe tidbit in this context is the academic ridicule factor. Many who explore or express interest in ancient astronaut theories, even within academia, report facing skepticism, dismissal, or even ridicule from their peers. This can create a chilling effect, discouraging researchers from pursuing unconventional lines of inquiry for fear of damaging their careers. It's like knowing that if you bring up a certain weird topic at the faculty dinner, you'll be politely, or not so politely, excluded from future conversations. This perceived atmosphere can lead proponents to believe that the mainstream is actively trying to suppress these ideas, rather than simply disagreeing with them based on evidentiary standards. Historians still argue whether the current academic framework for interpreting ancient myths and archaeological sites is sufficiently open to considering truly anomalous data, or if its inherent conservatism sometimes leads to a premature dismissal of evidence that doesn't fit neatly into existing models. It's a debate about the balance between healthy skepticism and intellectual curiosity, between maintaining rigorous standards and being open to paradigm shifts. So you find yourself at a crossroads. On one side, the weight of academic consensus, built on decades of research, linguistic analysis, and archaeological fieldwork, presenting a largely human-centric story of development. On the other, a compelling alternative narrative pieced together from anomalies, reinterpreted myths, and a willingness to consider extraterrestrial intervention. Is it a case of dedicated scholars diligently separating fact from fiction? Or is it a more complex situation where prevailing paradigms might inadvertently filter out inconvenient truths or uncomfortable questions? The debunking is thorough and often convincing based on current evidence. Yet the questions persist, fueled by those tantalizing what if that the ancient world so generously provides. The challenge for you is to weigh the evidence, consider the arguments, and decide where the most plausible, or at least the most intriguing path lies. The Anunnaki might be relegated to the realm of myth by most scholars, but their story, once heard, is not easily forgotten. Having navigated the robust critiques from mainstream academia, you might feel a pull to reconcile the ancient narratives with more contemporary mysteries. If these Anunnaki or similar beings were zipping around in Vimanas and celestial chariots thousands of years ago, influencing human development and leaving behind enigmatic traces, what happened to them? Did they just complete their gold mining mission, give humanity a few pointers, and then clock out for good? Or could there be a connection between these ancient accounts of sky gods and the persistent, often baffling phenomenon of unidentified flying objects, UFOs? Or as they are now more formally termed, unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs. You start to see a fascinating, though highly speculative, through line. The descriptions of gods descending from the heavens in fiery vehicles, of strange aerial battles, of beings imparting knowledge, these don't sound entirely dissimilar to some modern UFO encounter reports, albeit translated into the language and worldview of ancient cultures. Could the chariots of the gods, described by Ezekiel or in the Indian epics, be the ancient equivalents of the tic-tacs or flying saucers reported by pilots and witnesses today? It's a leap, certainly, but one that many researchers in the ancient astronaut and UFO fields find compelling. Consider the sheer consistency of certain reported UAP characteristics: silent, rapid movement, an ability to hover, instantaneous acceleration, and sometimes even an apparent ability to appear and disappear. Now, filter such an observation through the eyes of someone from 2000 BC. Lacking any concept of advanced aerodynamics, propulsion systems, or extraterrestrial life, how would they describe such an encounter? They would likely use the most powerful and awe-inspiring terms available to them: a divine messenger, a fiery chariot, a sign from the gods. It's like trying to explain a smartphone to a medieval peasant. They might describe it as a magic mirror that speaks with the voices of spirits. The Anunnaki narrative, with its tales of beings from Nibiru coming to Earth, interacting with humanity, and possessing advanced technology, provides a ready-made backstory for at least some UAP sightings. If they were here then, could they, or their descendants or other similar extraterrestrial civilizations, still be here now? Perhaps observing us, perhaps subtly interacting, perhaps even waiting for a particular moment to make their presence more widely known. The idea isn't that every UAP is an Anunnaki scout ship, but rather that the ancient stories might provide a precedent, a framework for understanding that visitation by non-human intelligences is not just a modern sci-fi trope, but potentially a recurring theme in human history. The mainstream historical fact is that reports of unusual aerial phenomena have been documented throughout history, long before the modern UFO era began in the mid-20th century. Medieval chronicles, Renaissance paintings, and even ancient texts sometimes contain descriptions of strange lights, objects, or events in the sky that are difficult to explain purely as meteorological or astronomical phenomena, like comets or meteors. For example, the celestial phenomenon over Nuremberg in 1561, depicted in a famous woodcut, showed numerous objects, including spheres, crosses, and tubes, seemingly engaged in an aerial battle. While interpretations vary, mass hysteria, meteorological event, symbolic representation, it's an example of a pre-modern UAP report. A quirky or fringe tidbit connecting ancient accounts to modern ufology is the Watcher tradition, found in texts like the Book of Enoch, an ancient Hebrew apocalyptic religious text, ascribed by tradition to Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah. The Watchers, or Grigori, are described as angels who descended to earth, took human wives, and taught forbidden knowledge, like weaponry and sorcery, to mankind, leading to corruption and eventually contributing to God's decision to send the Great Flood. Some see parallels between the Watchers and the Anunnaki, particularly the Igigi, who rebelled, or those Anunnaki who intermingled with humans. In modern ufology, the Watchers concept is sometimes invoked to describe extraterrestrial observers who monitor human development, sometimes intervening, sometimes not. It's like our planet has cosmic parole officers, checking in to see if we're behaving. Historians still argue whether the modern UFO phenomenon is primarily a product of Cold War anxieties, misidentification of known objects and phenomena, psychological factors, and popular culture, or if there is a core of unexplained sightings that might point to genuinely novel technology, whether human-made, secret military projects, or non-human in origin. The debate is incredibly polarized, with fervent believers on one side and deep skeptics on the other, and a growing number of cautious investigators in the middle, particularly as governments and military bodies have begun to release more information and take the subject more seriously. The connection between ancient sky gods and modern UAPs, if it exists, suggests a continuity of presence, or at least a continuity of visitation. It implies that Earth has been a point of interest for non-human intelligences for a very long time. Perhaps the Anunnaki never truly left. Maybe they integrated, or went into a period of quiet observation, their overt interactions fading into myth as human civilization developed its own trajectory. Or perhaps, as Sitchin's Nibiru theory suggests, their visits are cyclical, tied to their home planet's long orbit, meaning they come and go. If you entertain this connection, then every declassified UAP report, every credible pilot testimony, every piece of strange radar data doesn't just speak to a contemporary mystery, it echoes those ancient tales. The gods might have traded their celestial barges for sleek, silent craft, but the fundamental dynamic, advanced beings from elsewhere interacting with Earth, remains hauntingly similar. It makes you look up at the night sky with a different sense of wonder, and perhaps a touch of trepidation. Are those just stars? Or are the watchers, the Anunnaki, or someone else entirely, still out there, continuing a long, silent vigil that began in the deepest mists of our recorded and unrecorded past? The lights in the sky today might just be the latest chapter in a story that started with fiery chariots and divine descents. The tantalizing thread connecting ancient sky gods to modern UAP sightings inevitably leads you to another profound question. If these beings, Anunnaki, Watchers, or whatever name we give them, were here in the past and might still be observing us, is there any indication they might make a more overt return? You now find yourself delving into the realm of prophecy, eschatology, and modern theories that anticipate a grand re-emergence of these powerful, perhaps creator entities. It's a landscape filled with diverse beliefs, ancient warnings, and hopeful, or sometimes fearful predictions. Many ancient cultures didn't just have creation myths. They also had end-of-the-world scenarios or prophecies of a future age when gods or divine beings would return to Earth, often to judge humanity, usher in a new era, or resolve some cosmic conflict. Think of the Norse Ragnarok, the Hindu concept of Kalki, the final avatar of Vishnu, who will appear at the end of the Kali Yuga, or the messianic prophecies in Abrahamic religions. While these are traditionally interpreted in spiritual or metaphorical terms, within the ancient astronaut framework, they can be reread as potential forecasts of a physical return of the sky people. It's like finding an old AOU note from your divine landlord, promising to come back and sort things out at a later, unspecified date. Consider the prophecies surrounding Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, in Mesoamerica. When Hernán Cortés and the Spanish conquistadors arrived in Mexico in 1519, their appearance, with their lighter skin, beards, and arrival from the east in great houses, ships, coincided with some indigenous prophecies about the return of Quetzalcoatl. This unfortunate coincidence, according to some historical accounts, initially made the Aztec Emperor Moctezuma too hesitant to oppose the Spanish, believing Cortés might indeed be the returning deity. While the tragic outcome of that encounter is well documented, the underlying belief in a god's prophesied return played a significant, if complex, role. Could other, less misunderstood returns be foretold in similar ancient traditions? Then there are the more modern interpretations and channel materials that speak of various extraterrestrial groups, some benevolent, some less so, who are allegedly monitoring Earth and may make their presence known more openly in the future. These narratives often tie into ideas of a coming great awakening or a paradigm shift for humanity, where contact with these beings will act as a catalyst for profound spiritual and societal transformation. Some of these theories suggest that the Anunnaki themselves are due for a return, perhaps coinciding with another passage of Nibiru, to see how their human experiment has progressed, or perhaps to reclaim what they see as theirs. It's a scenario that blends ancient myth with New Age spirituality and ufology, creating a potent mix of anticipation and anxiety. You might find yourself wondering if you should start learning basic Anunnaki greetings, just in case. The mainstream historical fact is that apocalyptic and millenarian prophecies, those predicting a major transformation of society, often involving a catastrophic end to the current order and the establishment of a new perfect one, have been a recurring feature in many religions and cultures throughout history. These prophecies often arise during times of social upheaval, stress, or crisis, offering meaning, hope, or a call to repentance. The belief in a coming judgment, a divine intervention, or the return of a savior figure is a powerful psychological and social force, and its persistence across diverse traditions is a testament to deep-seated human hopes and fears about the future and our place in the cosmic order. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the Planet X or Nibiru collision fear that periodically surfaces in popular culture, often tied to specific dates or astronomical alignments. These theories, largely fueled by misinterpretations of Sitchin's work and online fearmongering, predict that Nibiru's return will cause catastrophic Earth changes, pole shifts, or even a direct collision. Mainstream astronomy consistently debunks these claims, stating there is no evidence for such a rogue planet on a collision course. However, the idea of Nibiru's return, even without the immediate cataclysm, remains a potent symbol within ancient astronaut circles for the potential reappearance of the Anunnaki. It's like an intergalactic alarm clock set for some unknown future date. Scholars still argue whether prophecies of divine return or end-time scenarios are purely socio-religious constructs designed to provide comfort, enforce moral codes, or articulate anxieties about the future, or if some of them could be based on or influenced by dimly remembered cycles of catastrophe and renewal, or even cyclical astronomical events that ancient cultures observed and mythologized. Could some prophecies be less about a literal deity returning on a cloud, and more about predictable, long-term cosmic cycles that our ancestors were more attuned to, and which might bring about significant environmental or societal changes? The notion of a return of the creators carries immense implications. If true, it would validate the ancient astronaut hypothesis in the most dramatic way possible. It would force a complete reevaluation of human history, our origins, and our place in the universe. It could usher in an era of unprecedented technological and spiritual advancement, or it could pose an existential threat, depending on the nature and intentions of the returning beings. Are they coming back as benevolent mentors, like Enki in his better moments? Or as stern judges, like Enlil before the flood? Or perhaps simply as resource managers, checking on their ancient investment? The prophecies are often vague, open to multiple interpretations, and frequently co-opted by various groups to support their own agendas. Yet, the persistence of this return narrative, whether in ancient scriptures or modern ufology, taps into a deep human longing for connection with something larger than ourselves, a desire for answers to the ultimate questions of existence. Whether these clues point to a literal, impending event or simply reflect our ongoing struggle to understand our past and future, the idea that the gods might one day reappear on the world stage remains a powerful and unsettling thought lurking in the background of our modern, secularized world. The past, it seems, might not be done with us yet. The whispers of a potential return, the echoes of ancient prophecies, and the modern UAP enigma all create a fascinating, if unsettling, backdrop. As you navigate this labyrinth of theories, your attention might be drawn to specific temporal markers, moments that various groups or interpretations highlight as potentially significant. This brings us to the rather intriguing, and for our purposes, quite specific idea of Project 2025 or similar future data predictions. What could a year like 2025 or any near future date signify in the context of the creators and the possibility of profound, world-altering revelations? Now, it's crucial to state up front that Project 2025 isn't a universally recognized term within ancient astronaut theory in the same way Nibiru or Anunnaki are. There isn't one single, agreed-upon ancient prophecy or channeled text that specifically pinpoints 2025 as the year of return or disclosure. However, the near future, broadly speaking, often features in various modern prophetic interpretations, New Age predictions, and ufological speculations as a period of potential major shifts, increased UAP activity, or even open contact. The year 2025, for instance, can become a focal point, a symbolic placeholder for these anticipated events, much like 2012 was for a time due to interpretations of the Mayan calendar. It's less about a specific ancient stone tablet saying, "See you in 2025," and more about a confluence of modern expectations and interpretations of ongoing trends. You might find discussions online or in niche communities where certain researchers or intuitives suggest that alignments, energetic shifts, or undisclosed governmental timelines are pointing towards the mid-2020s as a critical window. These ideas often weave together disparate threads: the increasing public and governmental acknowledgement of UAPs, advances in our own technology, particularly space exploration and AI, perceived global crises that might necessitate an intervention, and interpretations of cyclical patterns in history or myth. It's like a detective piecing together clues from different cases, hoping they form a coherent picture pointing to a specific time frame for a major event. Point one angle could be the idea of escalating disclosure. If governments around the world are slowly, grudgingly admitting that UAPs are real, unexplained, and a potential national security concern, some might speculate that this is a controlled, phased rollout of information, leading to more significant revelations in the near future. Perhaps 2025, or a similar year, is seen as a target by which a certain level of public awareness or preparedness will be achieved, allowing for more substantial truths about non-human intelligence and historical interactions to be revealed without causing mass panic. It's the slow drip theory of disclosure, aimed at acclimatizing the population. Think of it as gradually increasing the temperature of the water so the frog doesn't jump out, the frog, in this case, being public disbelief or societal breakdown. Another line of speculation might tie into technological or societal tipping points. Could our own advancements be approaching a level that either attracts more direct attention from these creators or forces their hand? Perhaps our ventures into space, our experiments with AI, or even the precarious state of our global environment are seen as triggers. In the Anunnaki narrative, they intervened when humanity became too noisy or when their gold supply was threatened. Could modern human activities be creating new conditions that necessitate a renewed, more overt interaction? The mainstream historical fact is that predicting specific future dates for apocalyptic events or divine interventions has a very poor track record. Throughout history, numerous groups and individuals have prophesied the end of the world or major transformative events on specific dates. Think of the Millwrights in the 1840s, or various Y2K predictions, only for those dates to pass without the forecasted occurrences. This history of failed prophecy leads to considerable skepticism from mainstream observers regarding any new, specific date setting for extraordinary events. A quirky or fringe tidbit connected to future predictions is the concept of timeline convergence or optimal contact windows found in some esoteric and channel materials. These ideas suggest that there are complex, nonlinear dynamics at play, and that certain future periods represent moments where different potential timelines intersect, or where conditions are most favorable for significant events like open contact or major revelations. It's a highly metaphysical view, suggesting that the future isn't fixed but is a landscape of probabilities that can be influenced or navigated, and that certain years might represent nodes of high probability for transformative change. It's like trying to schedule a cosmic conference call when everyone's interdimensional calendars are free. Historians still argue whether the persistent human tendency to look for patterns, make predictions, and anticipate imminent, transformative change is a fundamental aspect of human psychology, perhaps an evolutionary adaptation for preparedness, a byproduct of our pattern-seeking brains, or if just occasionally, such collective intuitions might tap into something real, even if the specifics are often wrong. Is our fascination with future dates like 2025 merely a reflection of our anxieties and hopes? Or could there be subtle undercurrents that some individuals or groups are perceiving, however imperfectly? So, what might 2025, or any similar near-future marker, truly signify in the grand narrative of the creators? It could be nothing more than another year that comes and goes, marked by the usual human dramas and incremental changes. Or, if you lean into the more speculative interpretations, it could represent a period where the veil thins, where the long-held secrets about our past and the ongoing presence of others begin to unravel more rapidly. It might not be a sudden arrival of spaceships on every lawn, but perhaps a cascade of disclosures, scientific breakthroughs that challenge old paradigms, or even subtle shifts in global consciousness that make the impossible seem a little more plausible. The idea of Project 2025 or any near-future focal point serves as a powerful narrative device. It creates anticipation, a sense of impending significance. Whether it's based on concrete insider knowledge, as some might claim, a deep intuitive sense, or simply wishful thinking, it focuses the collective gaze on the horizon, wondering if those ancient sky gods, those Anunnaki, are indeed preparing for a new act in our shared, long-running drama. The calendar page turns, and you watch and you wait, wondering if the script of history is about to take an unexpected turn. As you stand at this speculative threshold, peering into a near future potentially marked by revelation or continued mystery, you find yourself looking back over the vast, sprawling tapestry we've woven together. From the primordial murmurs of humanity's beginnings, through the clay tablets of Sumer naming the Anunnaki, their celestial hierarchy and their alleged gold-seeking agenda, to the genetic engineering of humankind, the echoes of creator gods in worldwide myths, the impossible artifacts and sky chariots, the devastating deluge and the subsequent rebuilding, it's been quite a journey. We've touched on scholarly scrutiny, the connections to modern UAP phenomena, and the prophetic hints of a potential return, perhaps even focusing on a symbolic year like 2025. What does it all mean? How do these narratives, whether you view them as literal history, garbled myth, or profound metaphor, challenge our understanding of who we are and our place in the grand cosmic story? Ultimately, this entire exploration forces you to confront the fundamental questions of identity and origin. If the conventional narrative of purely terrestrial, unassisted human evolution is the complete story, then our place is relatively clear, albeit still wondrous. We are the product of eons of natural selection on this planet, a remarkable species that developed consciousness, culture, and technology on our own. But if you allow even a sliver of possibility for the Anunnaki narrative, or for similar interventions by advanced non-human intelligences, then our identity becomes far more complex, far more hybrid. We become potentially a species with a dual heritage, one foot firmly planted in the soil of Earth, the other, perhaps, tracing its lineage back to the stars, or at least to beings who came from them. This redefinition isn't necessarily about diminishing human achievement. If we were uplifted or genetically modified, as the more radical theories suggest, it doesn't mean our art, our science, our philosophies, our capacity for love and cruelty are any less our own. It simply means the initial spark, the raw material, or the guiding hand might have had an external component. It's like learning you were adopted. It doesn't change who you are intrinsically, but it adds a whole new dimension to your personal history, a new set of ancestors and origins to consider. Perhaps the image of God in which humanity was allegedly made refers not to a spiritual abstraction, but to a literal, physical template provided by these Anunnaki creators. The Anunnaki story, in particular, offers a challenging perspective on the nature of gods. They are not presented as omnipotent, omniscient, or even necessarily benevolent beings in the way many modern religions conceive of divinity. The Sumerian gods, as depicted, are powerful, yes, and possess knowledge far beyond early humans, but they are also driven by very relatable motivations: ambition, jealousy, fear, desire, and even boredom. They make mistakes, they argue, they have political squabbles. If these were our creators, then our own often contradictory human nature, our capacity for breathtaking creativity and appalling destruction, for profound empathy and cold calculation, might be seen as an inherited trait, a reflection of our makers. It certainly makes the old "why do bad things happen" theological debate a bit more complicated if the gods themselves aren't paragons of virtue. The mainstream historical fact is that human beings have always sought to understand their origins and their place in the cosmos, creating elaborate mythologies and religious systems to provide answers and meaning. The scientific revolution provided a new set of tools and a new narrative: evolution, cosmology, archaeology, which have greatly expanded our understanding. Yet, for some, these scientific explanations, while powerful, don't fully satisfy the deeper existential questions or account for all the anomalies and persistent myths from our ancient past. A quirky or fringe tidbit in this reflective space is the idea of cosmic ancestry or panspermia, the theory that life on Earth, or the building blocks of life, originated elsewhere in the universe and were seeded here, perhaps by comets or meteorites. While panspermia is a scientifically debated hypothesis, it touches on a similar theme that our roots might extend beyond this planet. The Anunnaki story takes this a step further, suggesting not just the seeding of simple life, but the direct intervention in the evolution of intelligent life. It's the difference between finding a mysterious seed in your garden versus finding out the head gardener was an alien who deliberately planted and cultivated you. Historians still argue whether the profound and enduring human need to create creator-god narratives stems from a psychological imperative to project human social structures onto the cosmos, a way of making sense of a vast and impersonal universe, or if these stories, at their deepest core, might contain distorted echoes of actual, formative events or encounters in our very distant past. Are we just telling ourselves stories to feel less alone, or are we remembering something vital, something that has been deliberately forgotten or systematically reinterpreted? Redefining humanity in this context means embracing a larger, more complex, and potentially more unsettling cosmic story. It means acknowledging that we might not be the sole masters of our destiny, nor the only sentient beings that have walked this planet or influenced its history. It opens up the possibility that our future might be as intertwined with these others as our past allegedly was. It invites a sense of humility, but also a profound sense of wonder and connection to a much vaster universe teeming with possibilities. Whether the Anunnaki were real extraterrestrial visitors, powerful human elites deified over time, or purely mythological figures, their story, and the countless similar creator myths from around the world, challenge us to think beyond the familiar, to question our assumptions, and to remain open to the idea that the story of humanity is far from over, and its earliest chapters might still hold surprising revelations. Our cosmic story, it seems, is an ongoing co-authorship, and the final pages are yet to be written. The lights may be dim, and the fan still humming its soft lullaby, but the echoes of these ancient creators, these Anunnaki, these gods who might have walked among us, will likely linger in your thoughts. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps you'll ponder those immense stone blocks, those flying chariots, and the persistent, nagging question of our true origins. The past is never truly past, especially when it whispers of such grand and mysterious beginnings. It's a story that continues to unfold within the pages of dusty texts, beneath the sand of ancient lands, and perhaps even within the silent, star-dusted expanse of your own dreams. The universe, as you close your eyes, feels a little larger now, doesn't it? The familiar constellations might seem to hold new secrets, new possibilities. These tales of Anunnaki, of gods who shaped worlds and perhaps even shaped us, are not meant to provide definitive answers, but to open doors in the mind, to invite a gentle questioning of the stories we've always been told. As the gentle rhythm of your breathing deepens, let these grand ancient narratives recede like the tide, leaving behind only a sense of wonder, a soft curiosity about the immense tapestry of time and the countless threads, seen and unseen, that connect us to the dawn of everything. The mysteries of who we are and where we came from are vast, like a star-filled ocean, and tonight, you've merely dipped a toe into its cool, enigmatic waters. There's no need to solve it all before sleep claims you. Just let the possibilities drift like distant galaxies in the quiet universe of your mind. The journey was long, the ideas vast, but now it's time for rest. The Anunnaki, real or imagined, have played their part for tonight. The stage of your dreams is now yours alone. Let peace settle over you, as soft and encompassing as the night sky itself. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye, and see you again in the next stories.